Hey, I'm Dan, and if you're new to homebrewing, so am I. Welcome to my adventures in homebrewing. Hey everybody, it's Dan, and welcome back to my adventures in homebrewing. Thank you very much for joining us this week. I need to say thank you to Zach Weinberg for being on the show. Toronto Brewing Homebrew Supply Store is fantastic. Again, like I said, check them out. Their customer service is fantastic, and they are more than willing to help you out and take the time and make sure that you get what the proper ingredients or the proper equipment that you need. From talking to these guys, they're all either mead, cider, or beer makers. So you're in good hands. So this week, like I've been saying, we're very fortunate to have back this wonderful gentleman. We have Horst Dornbusch back with us. He is, in my opinion, an extreme wealth of knowledge in all things German beer. Go check out his I believe there's two websites, right? Cervesia .com.
Cervesiacommunications.com, and Cervesia is, of course, the Latin word for beer.
Yep. And then you also have another one, Horst Dornbusch.
Just one word, my name, horstdornbusch.com. Right.
So
you can find me there.
There you go. So check this gentleman out. Again, wealth of knowledge. He's put out some books. He's been a brewer. He's owned a brewery. Now he's a consultant in the brewing world. Horst, how are we doing this week, man?
Did we lose your audio?
Nope, you didn't lose my audio.
Okay, so I'm just saying. Well, greetings to Canada, one of my favorite countries in the world. I always love to visit Canada, and right now I'm doing fine. We've got some rain outside, and that's a very welcome change from the super heat wave from which we suffered in the last couple of days. So everything is fine at this end of the world.
Fantastic. So like we were talking about yesterday, I think we're going to be talking about one of my favorite beers today. It's in my opinion, one of the best beers to have on a really hot summer day, which is the Berliner Weisse.
The Berliner Weisse, yes.
I hope I said it right, because normally I hear people
say... You are very close. It's okay.
Because I have
so many... Kennedy said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." And that really means I'm a jelly donut. You know that. You have to say not "Ich bin ein Berliner," but "Ich bin ich bin Berliner." You leave out the definite article, the indefinite article. So then you are a Berliner. But if you say "ein Berliner," Berliner is also a jelly donut.
I like jelly donuts, but I'm not a jelly donut. So yeah, so the Berliner Weisse is one of my favorite beers, and I guess the reason why I like it so much, it's not so much over the top sour as most of the sour beers are now, like traditional sour beers or kettle sours and things like that. Mm-hmm. It's actually more of a balanced sour to tart ratio, I find. Right. And it's so gently hopped that it gives more to the flavor than it does bitter.
That's correct, yes. And it's, of course, a very old beer style, and nobody quite knows where it originated. There are several crazy theories. One theory says the Huguenots, when they fled France under Louis XIV, brought the beer style to Berlin, but there is no real evidence of that. Other people believe that Bohemian immigrants moved to Berlin and brought a sour wheat beer style with them. But again, there is very little evidence of that. My personal favorite is that it is an outgrowth of a beer called Bräuhain beer, which is a sour beer that evolved in Hanover, and which in turn is an outgrowth of the Keuter beer, which was a medieval barley and wheat brew that was slightly sour and was probably the most common beer in the late Middle Ages in the lowlands of Northwestern Europe. So to me, it's almost a natural supposition that that is the true origin of this beer.
It's kind of weird that there's really no set defined lineage for this beer, but some of the things that we were talking about yesterday is like how you were telling me how they were served and how they were made. So I know nowadays, like when I make mine, it's 50-50 with the malts. So much wheat to I use Pilsner malt, so it's very, very light. Um, and then I use Lallemann's wild wild brew Philly sour lactobacillus in yeast pitch. But you were telling me that things were a little more different when they were initially made.
Well, obviously there are different types of sournesses, if we can use a plural for that word, of different character and quality. And obviously, in the old days, during open fermentation, wild fermentation, if you wish, what you got into your brew were basically ambient airborne microbes, including brewer's yeast, but also all kinds of bacteria, such of the lactobacillus and pediococcus variety, and sometimes also a little bit of Brettanomyces. So it depends on where you are and what your natural ambient microbial uh, 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 environment is. Um, there was a professor of what is now the VLB in Berlin, the Brew University, Professor Delbrück, who in the 1930s managed to isolate the microbes that create that specific Berliner Weisse taste. And he discovered a lactobacillus type that had hitherto previously not been known. And it since then carries his name. It's Lactobacillus delbrueckii, after Professor Delbrück, who subsequently in the 1930s emigrated from Germany to the United States and eventually became a Nobel Prize laureate, I believe, in medicine. So he is a very illustrious chap, but in the early days, he ran the Institute for the Fermentation Trade. That's what the institute was called in those days. And he discovered Lactobacillus delbrueckii. And to the best of my understanding, you can now purchase Berliner Weisse microbial mixtures. I know that White Labs produces one.
Mhm.
I think Yeast produces a specific Delbrueckii preparation, and there are probably many others. But if you don't get the one with the specific microbe that is ambient and existent in Berlin, your flavor will be slightly off. And it may taste more like a Flanders Red or a Lambic, which is kind of not what you want in an authentic Berliner
No.
Weisse. And of course, in terms of the yeast portion of the fermentation, I would recommend a very, very neutral, clean fermenting German ale yeast, such as an Altbier yeast, and I like to use Yeast 1007, which mates very well with Lactobacillus delbrueckii. So,
Okay. So with that, we were also talking about there were some other ways to make a sour with other things. Because I think you mentioned there was you're laughing at me because you know where I'm going with this, but I'm not gonna talk about putting like full fat yogurt into beer to
Okay,
sour it.
we are
I'm not
not
gonna
going.
go there.
We're
But
not going towards yogurt.
we're not
Okay.
gonna go there. But you did mention about acidulated malt, how we could use that.
The what? Sorry.
Acidulated.
Okay. Now, obviously, in the old days, open fermentation, you got what you got. And if you're in Berlin, chances are you had Lactobacillus delbrueckii, a whole bunch of other microbes, maybe some pediococcus, and with any luck, you had a nice ale nice bottom top fermenting yeast in the mix as well.
Mhm.
That was very simple. You just wait, right? Um, Nowadays, of course, we don't do that anymore. So one way of souring the beer, and it's not with Lactobacillus delbrueckii, but just with straight Lactobacillus, is to put up to maybe 10% of acidulated malt into the mash. And that even conforms to the German beer purity law, because in nature, barley always is always a host to lactobacillus as well. So it is a totally natural process. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, of course, you make your wort, you store it in the kettle, and then you add your souring agent into the kettle, let it sour, boil the wort to kill the bacteria, and then that way you don't infect anything in terms of bottling equipment or
Right.
fermentation equipment down the road, because it's sterile. Now, the other way of doing it is, of course, you pitch yeast in the fermenter. And I recommend you pitch the yeast first and wait a couple of days before you pitch the bacterial culture, because that allows the yeast to get a head start and produce enough alcohol. Otherwise, the voracious bacterium might um, take too much sugar away from the yeast, and you may not get an alcohol level that's desirable. And with Berliner Weisse, they used to make a lot of different types of Berliner Weisse, up to maybe 7% alcohol.
Mhm.
Nowadays, most of them are between 3 and 4% alcohol. So that's what you would be striving for.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really enjoy about them is that they're very light alcohol beers, and during the summer when it's hot, that's kind of the thing that I gravitate to, because I enjoy something that's just you're able to sit back, relax, and have. But one thing that we were talking about yesterday is that the IBUs on them is extremely low. It's anywhere, I think we talked anywhere from 3, no more than 8
That's
on.
correct. When I've made Berliner Weiss a couple of times, and I always calculated for roughly 5 IBUs. And in terms of the selection, of course, because we are talking about a traditional beer style, I would use only some of the Central European land races. That is
Mhm.
Saaz, Hersbrucker Spalt, Hallertauer Mittelfrüh, um, Tettnanger, and perhaps the Alsatian Strisselspalt. These are all very low IBU, very low bittering hops, but they have a low alpha acid level, but they have a lot of wonderful aromas. So that
Yes.
is kind of what you want in a Berliner Weisse. So I would
Yeah.
go for that.
Yeah, that's one I use the Tanger. I know I'm butchering that name. I know I can't say it right. I am so sorry.
You are
But
you what? Say that again?
Tanger or
Tettnanger?
yeah, Tetnanger.
Tettnanger.
That's
Okay.
that that's the one I use when I make mine. And I find that it's not overpowering. It gives great aroma and also adds to the flavor. But
Yes.
touching on
And hang on, and genetically, it's related to Saaz.
oh really?
Yes, it's a Saaz variety that has migrated gradually um, westward, and
Huh.
Spalt, Hersbrucker, Strisselspalt, and Tettnanger are Saaz derivatives that have adapted to their new local environment, whereas
Oh.
Hallertauer Mittelfrüh has nothing to do genetically with Saaz.
So if the ones other than Hallertau are related to Saws, can you?
Hallertauer is not related to
Yeah, that's
Saaz,
what I'm saying. It's
but all
not.
the others are.
All the others are, yeah. Can you use Saws and one of the others in a combination in the beer, or is it better just to go with one?
No, you can use any combination. You can take a mixture of all 5 or 6 or whatever.
Oh,
Just stay away from the citrus notes or the
right.
heavy sort of woody, mushroomy type Pacific Northwest hops. They would be they would create too much of a signature in that beer, and it would destroy the delicate tartness that you're looking for.
Right. Now, touching on, we were talking a little bit about flavor there a second ago, and I was going to ask that or bring this up because we also touched on this yesterday when we were just chatting. Is when I do my version of a Berliner Weisse, is that once I'm sure it's pretty much done fermenting, I'll transfer on top of, say, a pureed fruit like raspberries. And you were telling me there was not necessarily the traditional way of doing it. There's other
Uh-huh.
ways. And then you also mentioned that there was some other things that people had used to flavor it. Like you said, you asked you if you want green or red
Mhm.
when you're in Berlin. So can we touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Now here's the trick. If you're adding fruit, whenever you add fruit to a ferment and the ferment agent, yeast or bacteria, is still active and alive, then of course these microbes will start consuming the fruit sugars,
Mhm.
the fructose in your fruit, which contributes to alcohol and takes away any sweetness. So you're getting the raspberry flavor, but no sweetness, which is kind of what is desired in a modern Berliner Weisse. Um, so that in a lambic, for instance, obviously you get the really strong sour and tart, acidic mouthfeel, the mouth puckering almost
Mhm.
sensation. And of course, in a lambic, you add the fruit directly. You create it from framboise, fraise, and all that, pêche, and so on. But in a Berliner Weisse, they try not to do that. However, there is one large brewery left in Berlin that still makes big commercial Berliner Weisse, is the Schulte Brewery. They do what you do. They basically add fruit to the ferment, but then immediately they filter it and pasteurize it so that
Hmm.
any live yeast is eliminated. And so they can keep some of the fruit sugars in the liquid. Um, and you have to pasteurize it, of course, to neutralize, to kill basically the microbes. That to me does not taste like real Berliner Weisse. You can purchase in Berlin at least, and it's hard to find on this continent, but in Berlin you can also purchase unflavored Berliner Weisse, usually made with about 40 to 50% malted wheat.
Mhm.
And that makes it different from, let's say, a wit beer, which is made with unmalted wheat, or a Belgian lambic, for instance, which may contain malted wheat. So the Berliners use malted wheat, um, and the the flavoring, the sweetness that you would like to have to counterbalance some of the tartness comes from syrups. So the Berliners make a sugar syrup from a raspberry flavored sugar syrup,
Okay.
and that's red. And then they also make another sugar syrup from a, and I looked that up and I wrote it down for you, um, from a um, a ground cover plant, a leafy plant that grows in very well in Germany at the edges of forests. It's called woodruff. In English, in German, it's called Waldmeister, which means forest master. Um,
Okay.
okay, and in English, we call that woodruff. You take the greenish leaves of that plant and you create an extract or an essence from that, which you use in a syrup. And I looked it up, and The perfumey component in that plant is called coumarin, Coumarin. So I couldn't remember the chemical name
Right.
yesterday when we talked, but so I looked it up. Um, and originally the Germans used that plant to flavor a punch of young wine, white wine,
Okay.
which is very tart.
Hmm.
Um, and in they call it a Maibowle, a Maybowl. It's a punch made with
Hmm.
relatively young, slightly tart, and very dry white wine. They add strawberries to it, woodruff, and if you really want to splurge, they add a bottle of champagne to it. That's where it comes from,
All
and
right.
it is and it is this plant that has or the flavor this flavoring has migrated from the wine bowl to the chalice of the Berliner Weisse chalice.
Hmm.
And so at a, when you order a Berliner Weisse in Berlin, you say, I want a red, or you say, I want a green. And the server knows that when you say green, you want a chalice of cool Berliner Weisse beer with a little shot, maybe 50 milliliters in a 1/3 liter bottle, 50 milliliters of woodruff flavored sugar syrup.
That's
And
cool.
it's conventional for ladies who lunch in the summer in a street cafe in Berlin to sip their Berliner Weisse out of the chalice with a straw. And that is kind of, we would consider that unusual, but that is the custom in Berlin.
Okay, that's good to know. So, one thing I didn't get a chance to ask you yesterday, mainly
Sure.
because like I have a bit of a squirrel head because I get distracted easily. Um, but why do Berliners use chalices for their Berliner Weisse? Is it to help um, open the beer up to the so people get more of the aroma? Is it more to open up the actual body so it tastes better? This is one of the things I'm always curious about.
That's interesting. I have never researched any what the reason might be, but I could give you a I could speculate if I
Yeah,
may.
sure.
You know that when Napoleon basically defeated the Prussians, what was it, 1805 or something like
Yep.
that, um, he occupied Berlin. And that's where he got his first taste of Berliner Weisse.
Hmm.
And he called it Le Champagne du Nord, the champagne of the North.
Yep.
And as you know, the real Berliners call it the champagne of the working class because there were 700 breweries in Berlin making Berliner Weisse. All right. So it was really the local quaff of the working stiff.
Okay.
Um, and sometimes some people drink champagne not out of a flute, but out of a chalice, right?
Hmm.
So maybe that's where it comes from. Maybe there is some kind of an association between a chalice and a noble beverage. I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
source, but I do not know. I don't have the answer for that. You stumped me.
It's not too often I get to do that to somebody. This is one of those things that I'm always curious about what a glass actually does to beers, because I know like some of them supposedly they hold in certain aromas or certain flavors due to their design. So I'm always curious to know why that glass was paired with that beer. So it's just out of plain curiosity, and I guess it's kind of like an OCD thing with me that I always need to find out why. But I guess I have a
How about
project.
how about when it's served with a straw? You can use the straw as a stirrer, and it's much easier
Yeah.
to distribute the sugary syrup evenly in the liquid than it would be the case if you had, let's say, a Kölsch glass, which is very narrow and tall, or a Pils glass. Um, it would be hard. Or how about a thistle for Scotch ale? It would be harder to get the syrup to be dispersed evenly. That's
Yeah,
why I have no idea, but that is a possible explanation.
that makes to me that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So, um, are there any other types of syrups that people use in Berliner Weisses that might not be so traditional?
Yes, you do find cassis, in other words, a black currant syrup as
Yep.
well. I've seen that. And of course, as a home brewer, you can be as creative as you wish, and you can use anything, almost literally anything. I wouldn't
Okay.
use pickle juice, but
Oh God, no. Because
no, I mean,
because I was thinking about just making a plain Berliner, and I don't know if you've ever heard of this stuff called Ribena. It's a black currant kind of like syrup that you can get, and you would mix it with water, and it becomes like a black currant, or it's like a black currant concentrate, I should say. And
okay.
you'd mix it with water or soda water, and you have a sparkling drink.
And you can mix that, I guess, also with Berliner Weisse
That's
in
what
the
I
glass.
was thinking. I was
Yes,
thinking it.
yes.
All right.
And by the way, yesterday we mentioned the woodruff syrup and the source of the syrup.
Yes.
Um, there is one brand that I know, at least in the United States, it's available by mail order.
Mhm.
And I'm not promoting anybody, but you can find it on the internet. The German brand name for the woodruff syrup is Centis, Zentis. That company, I believe they're located in Cologne. That's sort of the predominant woodruff syrup maker in Germany,
Okay.
Centis. And you should be able to find woodruff syrup by mail order, even in Canada, I would imagine.
Okay. I, I don't think I asked this, and I'm not sure if you mentioned it or not. If you did, please tell me, because, like I said,
That's okay.
my mind wanders at times.
Oh, we
Uh,
should be glad we have one.
Very true. Um, what is the flavor of Woodruff?
What is the what?
Flavor of Woodruff.
That's a difficult one um, to pin down. It's a ground cover. As I said, it grows along the forest, and it's also known as sweet woodruff. So it is perfumey. Um, it is slightly astringent, and is a hint almost of mowed grass, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So in a weird way, you could say it's almost like a hop substitute,
Oh,
because there are grassy hops,
yep.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And they're perfumey hops, and there are hops that are slightly sweetish. There's like a hint of sweetness in the hops. So and especially the aromatic German noble hops, they are of that ilk, if you wish.
Mm-hmm.
So um, so that's the kind of flavor contribution you get from woodruff.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, like hop water, because that's kind of a big thing right now. Is like in a lot of places, instead of making, say, like hard seltzers and things like that, they're actually making hop water. Like they'll infuse
Yes,
water with the flavor of the hop. So
they do.
maybe they got the idea to do that from Berliner Weisse, where they were using woodruff, and said, well, we don't want to use woodruff, but we have all these great different flavors of hops. Well, why don't we try that and see what happens? It kind of makes
Perhaps there
sense.
is a regional component to this, maybe a regional and historical component, because hop is a very finicky plant. 40% of the world's hops grows in the Hallertau,
Yeah.
40% in in Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, and the remaining 20% in a handful of countries scattered around the world, including Australia, New Zealand, Slovenia,
Mhm.
Czech Republic, Poland, Belgium, and the UK. I hope I got them all now.
Yes.
Um, so in Berlin, it would be next to impossible to grow hops. And if you can't grow, remember in the old days, people flavored before hops. Hop came into use in beer very slowly in the monasteries in the 9th and 10th century,
Mhm.
and it became the dominant flavor in the 13th and 14th century in Central Europe. Before that, they made Grut beer. In other words, a beer flavored with a mixture of herbs. And depending on the location, those herbs were very different. It could be mugwort, it could be rosemary, it could be any sort of herb that was
Right.
popular in your neighborhood as long as it wasn't poisonous. So in Berlin, you couldn't grow hops.
Right.
Thus, you would make a Grut beer, and maybe the just as hops became dominant as in the Grut mix and eventually became the only flavoring in beer in other parts of Europe, in Berlin, maybe Woodruff became the dominant portion of the Grut mix and eventually became the only one. That is, I mean, who knows? But
Yeah.
these things evolve over centuries very slowly. That is all before the internet.
Internet. What you either love it or hate it.
There we are.
So, is there anything else about a Berliner Weisse that you think people might want to know?
Well, it is very refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what else can we say about it? If you're adding a little bit of carafoam, carahel, carapils, something like a very pale caramel malt,
Mm-hmm.
you're getting added body, which gives you a bit of an effervescent creamy head. Um, Also, if your mash schedule is such that you basically skip the protease temperature range, you get more proteins into the beer, which means you get a nice creamy white head on top of your chalice
Mm-hmm.
that looks very attractive and it enhances the mouthfeel.
Okay. One thing you mentioned that you said there was like at one point in time almost I think 700 breweries in
Yes,
making
in,
Berliner Weisse.
that is correct. So it was strangely, this happens very often that a beer style becomes extremely popular and then tastes change and the beers and the style fades away. Um, the English mild at one point was extremely popular, and then it faded away, and now it's sort of gradually coming
Going
back.
back, yeah.
Um, you know, right now, IPAs are the rage, but I bet you in 20, 30 years, may have, they may take a much smaller place in the overall spectrum. Um, Tastes change. Sour beers, sour beers were the norm in the past
Mm-hmm.
because we did not have controlled fermentation. So you couldn't control your microbes. So basically all beers were sour. And also they were slightly smoky because you used direct fired kilns, right?
Yep.
So, and also use floor malting, which is, you germinate on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
which means your malts were all under modified. That means they had a lot more unconverted large chain protein molecules, which means um, the mouthfeel and the body was probably much more substantial than it is today. So to me, it would probably be more authentic to have a richer mouthfeel instead of the total dryness that you sometimes find in sour beers. So you have a little bit of a proteinous chewiness,
Mm-hmm.
the tartness, a gentle the gentle hop aromatics from German noble hops. And if you control your microbes, you get that Lactobacillus delbrueckii rather than a a Flanders sour red uh,
Yeah.
uh, microbe preparation. And if you get your Woodruff, then you're in for a unique taste experience, and it's fun to do. Um,
Last time I had you on the show, you had mentioned, because we were talking alt beer, and again, it's another one of my most favorite beers out there, that you could go in the region where people make it, and it varies from town to town or from brewery to brewery.
mhm.
And you said that it was the same thing with Kolsch. Is that the same thing with the Berliner Weisse?
Um, because nobody has tasted the beers that were made 200 or 300 years ago. Obviously, we do not know if there is sort of the evolution of a house yeast or a house flavor that that the breweries basically sold. Um, so that I don't think we have an answer to that question. The um, I go to Berlin occasionally, and I was actually totally disappointed the first time I went there and tried to drink a Berliner Weisse, because I was served that commercial product from the Schulteis company, which, and then I sort of investigated a bit, because I have friends in Berlin who are in the industry. And so I learned how that commercial Berliner Weisse was made, and it really has nothing to do with the traditional methods, which, as you know, I speak German, so
Mhm.
I can read all the old books and it's accessible to me. So the modern Berliner Weisse, the commercially available one, has nothing to do with the old brewing method. So I would imagine that the vats in which the beers were kept um, were um, different from one brewery to the next.
Mhm.
I should also mention a little funny thing.
Okay.
Because Berliner Weisse is highly effervescent, in the old days, of course, you might run the risk of exploding bottles.
Bottle bombs. Those are always fun.
And in the old days, they had earthenware crocks,
Yep.
they had stoppers, and string or wire to hold the stoppers in place.
Hmm.
So what the brewers did, they lined up the bottles one next to the other in a cellar, and then they covered the bottles with sand.
Okay.
And Brandenburg, by the way, is called the sandbox of Germany, because the soil there is very sandy
Okay.
from the old ice age and the deposits and all that,
Right.
right? Which is ideal for growing potatoes and cucumbers, by the way, the
Yes.
soil. And not hops and not barley.
No. No. No.
Anyway, so if the bottles did not explode, if the bottles did explode, the sand would absorb the shards and the pressure.
Oh.
So it was a safe way of testing whether or not the bottles would hold the pressure. If they
That's
didn't,
interesting.
so when you sold your Berliner Weisse, you simply dug up the bottles and you left behind the broken ones.
Huh. That's actually pretty ingenious when you think about it. That's a, that's a
But nowadays we can measure,
oh yeah.
we can measure everything and know whether or not we reach our terminal gravity and all that. We are now sort of, we have science to look into this more carefully. Um,
Oh,
but
I,
that was the old way of doing it.
oh gosh. I remember way back in the day at one point, a grandfather making beer at home. He was doing his version of the Pabst Blue Ribbon. and he was using cake yeast. So he would be like, okay, a little here, a little here, a little here, a little here, and then he'd cap everything, whatever else. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me, but okay. And all of a sudden, at some point in the evening, all you hear is kabang, 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 kabang. It was like bottle bomb hell in the basement, just going off. And you had friends come over sometimes, and he said, "What's that? Oh, someone's making beer. Oh, okay." And all of a sudden you hear, "Bang! What the hell's going on?" "Oh, don't worry, it's just the beer bottles exploding."
So, do you have sand in Ottawa?
Oh, we have clay.
Oh, that's right, clay soil. Yes,
Yeah,
you're
we have a
right.
lot of clay here. So
Yeah.
yeah, the clay would work. It would work if you dug a deep enough hole. I mean, I was adventurous at one point in time where I was getting told, don't bottle condition in growlers. Don't. It's a bad
Yeah,
idea.
that is.
Ah, well, I kind of did it anyway.
Well,
So, and it worked. It worked. So basically, I was very cautious though. I have a couple of buckets I used to use for fermenting, and one fits inside the other. So I put one inside the other, then I put its lid on top of it, and I put a pot, like a big canning pot on top of that. So like if anything's gonna go boom, it's gonna be contained.
that's interesting. That's interesting. Yes. Now, the other thing, um, you might, what was it? Where was I? I was just thinking of another item, and that is, now, the German beer purity law says that a wheat beer needs to have at least 50% wheat malt.
Yeah.
The Berliner Weisse, in that sense, does not conform to the purity law because it's nowadays brewed with less than 50%.
Mm-hmm.
The other interesting part is, when you select your yeast, do not use Bavarian wheat beer yeast.
Okay. That's
Because that one has phenolic and banana
oh
compounds that they are produced as fermentation byproducts by that particular yeast strain.
right.
And the name of it's the 4-vinyl guaiacol, that is the cloviness, and it's the isoamyl acetate, which is the banana flavor. If you use a Bavarian wheat beer yeast, even though Weissbier and Berliner Weisse sounds very similar,
They're not.
you are making a mistake. Use a clean tasting, clean fermenting German ale yeast, an Altbier yeast or Kölsch yeast. I have never tried to make Berliner Weisse with lager yeast, so I don't know if that works or what would come of it. But again, if you're a home brewer, that will be an interesting experiment to play around with.
Yeah, one thing I mentioned to you yesterday is that I have friends that own and run Escarpment Laboratories, which is a yeast producer in
Mhm.
Guelph, Ontario, and they do have a series of yeasts for Berliner Weisse. And I would mention this to you, where
Mhm.
everything's all included, all in one package, just like the Lulleman's Wild Philly Sour
Sure.
Brew. So I'm going to be doing my version of the Berliner this weekend,
Mhm.
and I'm going to try that yeast out and see how it is. It's called Berliner Brett 2,
I'm surprised that you say Brett, because to me, the Saccharomyces brettanomyces is really a flavor that is kind of alien to the typical Berliner Weisse taste.
yeah.
I'm really surprised, right?
Well,
Because
in reading it, it says that no matter what type of sour kind of beer that you have, or when you do it, there's always some form of Brett there, according to what these guys are microbiologists. So I got to be scientists.
Mhm.
So I've got a feeling, well, if it's that minimal, I've got a feeling it won't be as predominant as, say, the lactose bacillus with its tartness and everything else. So it's going to be an interesting experiment this week to see how it goes, and
Mhm.
I'll keep you in the loop. and let you know how
That's
it goes.
interesting. Does the package list the components that are
Um,
inside? Because it's a mix, you say.
I actually have it. I have it on my wall. All the yeast they make, I have it on my wall. So if you give me a sec,
Oh,
I'll. Oh, you got a phone ringing. So give me a second.
don't
I'll
worry,
find it.
let it ring, let it ring,
All
let it
right.
ring.
All right. Just give me a second. All right. Here we go. So according to these guys here at over at Escarpment Laboratories, it's Brettanomyces bruxellensis from an old bottle of Schulte Berliner Weisse, funkier than Berliner One, with peach notes, pear, and pineapple.
So it's Brettanomyces bruxellensis. Brettanomyces bruxellensis is one of them.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that is really okay. So obviously they're in business, right?
Yep.
So obviously they say, here is our product. You can use it for lambic, for Flanders Red Ale. You can use it for Berliner Weisse. You can throw it into a porter and get some funkiness in there or whatever. But you see, if you want to be authentic, I recommend you research the source for Lactobacillus delbrueckii. Okay, and also there's that as I said, the Berliner Weisse mix available from White Labs.
Yep.
Oh, goddamn phone. God damn it.
That's awesome.
It's, what shall we call it? The bane of fame.
Yep.
It's the the penalty you pay when they know you.
It's all good, man. I wish I had your problems.
Once you get to be my age, you appreciate the lack of problems more.
Horst, thank you very much for being on the show this week. It's always a pleasure talking with you, and I always learn with you. Thank you.
We can always do this again.
Absolutely. Folks, again, check out Horst at horstdornbusch.com, at cervesiacommunications.com. I believe he does have a Facebook page and a few other social media platforms that he uses. So please check him out. He is a wealth of knowledge. He was a co-editor with Garrett Oliver on the Oxford's book to beer. It's a fantastic read. Honestly, there's lots of information in it. Go check them out. Another thing, guys, just so you know, the 17th of this month, which is July, I'm going to be doing a live show with the guys from the Brew Tubers. So if you get a chance, please join us and listen in. If you have any questions for these fine gentlemen, please fire them off. And again, Horst, thank you very much for being on the show. We'll be in touch. I might just have to pick up the phone and call you, just so I can be one of those people on the phone.
Let's do something silly here. Hello? Listen, I'm on a Zoom call right now, and
Here we go.
Really busy, so get off my phone.
Again, Horst, thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much for coming along for the ride. A beer or two along the way. I'm Dan, and I'll see you on the other side.
Okay, bye.